Bill here. We're gonna show you how to deal with really wet, sticky dough. The process of dealing with the dough when it's really wet and sticky while you're making it, and how not to panic and get it to come out really perfect. Okay, so one of the things just remember is never panic, and some tools you can have here, things like this, a dough scraper, plastic dough scraper. I also keep like one of these little cake spatulas that also helps to clean off the dough scraper if you need, or clean off edges of the bowl. That's what this is used for. Other tools of the trade you might want to have handy is a scale that can go down to the 1/10 of the gram, and a regular scale that can go up to a couple of kilograms. I recommend going metric because I don't know, the whole world's pretty much metric, so you might as well just get used to it, right? So that's what we've got. So today's recipe will be pretty wet. It's going to be a 65% hydrated dough, but it's going to start off a little bit higher hydrated at first because I'm not going to add all the flour to it at first. So just so we can show you how to deal with really wet and sticky dough. So one of the secrets you do is you keep some of the flour product out, so that flour can help you to clean off your hands, to clean the sides of the bowl, to kind of deal with the stickiness as you go. So what do we have here? I'm going to leave the recipe for this dough in the description, but as you know, I've been making somewhat of a flour blend of mostly cake flour. Mostly bread flour, which is what's the percentage of this? Is about 12%. 12% protein, and then I add probably a quarter of the whole thing, or nearly a quarter of the whole thing has cake flour, which is 9% protein. So that that lowers the percentage of protein considerably, and helps to keep your dough kind of tender and get you closer to the texture that you find Neapolitan pizzas in Italy, and to give you a bit of a nuttiness to it, I add a bit of whole wheat flour. Again, the recipe's going to be in the description, but for now you can see this is my flour blend I've already prepared, and I've got my water. I think this is about 680 grams of flour, about 400 something grams of water. Again, recipe in the description. I've got about a little over half a gram of yeast. I'm going to be using this dough tomorrow, so this is going to be used a little after 24 hours, probably about 26 hours later, 28 hours later. 19 grams of salt. Again, I used this little guy to measure the 1/10 of a gram to try to get that, to dial that in. It doesn't have to be perfect. When you're making dough, err on the side of extra yeast. You can always deal with over fluffiness rather than over flatness, because if you don't get enough rise in your dough, you're going to be dealing with a flatter crust and bubbles that rise right in the middle of your pizza for no reason. You'll be thinking, well, what's that all about? Well, it's because you didn't have enough yeast, and the structure of the gluten structure the process was pretty much incomplete. So if your recipe calls for like half a gram of yeast, go with about 6/10 or 7/10 of yeast. So that's what we're doing here. We're going to err on the side of caution. And so that's my yeast, got my 19 grams of salt, got my tools. So one of the first things I'm going to do after I've got everything measured out is I'm going to take a little bit of my flour, about that much, and I'm going to leave that right off to the side here. Okay. The reason being is that's what I'm going to be using to clean myself up with. Okay. Move these guys out of the way. The first thing I'm going to do after that is I'm going to add my yeast to my water, and we're going to go ahead and just kind of dissolve that by hand. You might notice a little bit of flour on this bowl here, and that's because I initially measured my flour with this bowl, and I questioned myself whether I put the tare on on my scale or not, and if I had measured too much or too little, or just right. So I transferred it over to this to measure it one more time. So you can never be too careful. So always measure, and if you are in doubt, measure it again, because I've made doughs where I've doubled the salt, and I've made doughs where I forgot the salt. You know, and that can be a problem if you're selling pizzas. So you don't want to do that. Luckily, those problems I had many years ago, and I always double check myself now. So got my yeast dissolved here. This is cold water. I'm going to go ahead and start adding some flour. I'm going to add about half of this to get started. Okay, it's about half. Okay, so yeah, again, you can just use your hands. Remember, don't be afraid of the dough. It's going to be sticky. It's going to be wet, but it's going to be fun to mess with. Okay, so all I'm doing here, I'm not really doing any kneading motion. What I'm doing is just squeezing it between my fingers here, and just having fun with it. Just get all that moistened. So right now, there's no salt in here, so there's nothing really to kill the yeast. So right now the yeast is getting some moisture, and you can probably say it's getting woken up, and this is the time when you can really evenly distribute your yeast into the moisture, because the moisture is what's going to carry throughout the dough and throughout the flour. So you want to get your yeast nice and moistened at this stage. So you see the color, the tinge has a little bit of a darker color than just a plain white. That's because of the whole wheat flour here. And at this point, that's what you want. There's going to be more regular bread flour in, so the color is going to whiten up a little bit, but not too much. Okay, so just get that nice and moistened, kind of like a pancake batter, right? Okay. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and add the rest of that flour. All that in. So that's all the rest of the flour. We're going to add the salt now. Just dump all the salt right there in the middle. You see the salt there? So now I'm just going to kind of distribute the salt a little bit here. Okay. Squeeze and squeeze, squeeze. This is going to be pretty moist, considering I haven't added all the flour. There's still more flour to add. That's part of the recipe, but I haven't added it yet. So just again squeezing and squeezing, just kind of distribute the moisture. Okay. You can kind of do this with your knuckles around the bowl. And squeeze. So really, I haven't done any kneading yet. You can tell, look how sticky and wet that is. Look at it, it's all over my hands. That's okay though. Okay, at this point, I'm going to take this dough scraper, I'll scrape some of this off my hands. So I've done doughs even up to 75% hydration, and dealing with them is the same method. Keeps the flour out of it, and you can easily deal with it without any problems. Okay, so we got something going on like that. So okay, so now I've got that kind of mess, right? So okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of the flour. I'm still going to leave some out. And now we're going to start our kneading motion. Okay. Take and push in, and take it and push it in, take it and push it in, and push it in. And go out to the clean bowl. One of the advantages of not using a machine or a dough mixer electric dough mixer is dough mixers don't have a hand to get the edges of the bowl. So sometimes you have to turn it off and get the rest of that. So now I'm going to get the rest of this flour, clean off my hands. So this recipe is probably going to make, I think I set this for four large pizzas, about 12-inch pizzas, 4 12-inch pizzas. And I think I'm going to measure these to about 280, 285 grams maybe each. And sometimes I stretch them to a little bit larger than 12 inches, but anyway, that's the dough recipe. I've got my hands clean. Okay, so now you saw how sticky all that was, but as soon as I added a little bit of flour, and because of the squeezing motion, I was able to evenly distribute the moisture, so you didn't have pockets of dry product and pools of wetness. You didn't have so much of that. So that's how you avoid that kind of thing. So now I just have the easy job of kneading the dough. Let's check this. Now, what happens if you make a mistake? Let's see. How would you know? Let's see. You can always measure your product. So I got 11, 16, 1132. Does that match up? Let's see. And yes, it does. That matches up perfectly with my recipe. My recipe should have 1140 grams. And so we know that we didn't make a mistake because the total grams of all the product put together on my recipe adds up to 1140. That said 1136, but I say 4 grams is probably stuck to the edge of this bowl. Okay, so we're going to knead all of that product in together. It'll start picking this stuff up by itself, so you don't really have to worry about that. Okay, so one of the things to remember is with rest, the dough will even out its moisture by itself. And that's something you really need to let happen by itself. You can't really force that. Some people just keep kneading and kneading and kneading, but I recommend once it's picked everything up, a little bit more of this. Work that in a little bit more. Once it's picked up all the stuff off the sides of the bowl, and this one too. Once it's picked up everything. Once it picked up everything, I'm just going to let it rest for about 8 minutes. And that 8 minutes is going to distribute the rest of the moisture. You can just use the other bowl to cover it up, or you can use a pan lid to cover it up. I'll leave these off to the side, and I'll be back in about 8 minutes. Okay, so we've given this a decent rest of about 8 minutes, and you can see it's still kind of sticky. There's still little clumps there that have to work, but it's starting to feel like it's got some strength in it. Just stretching it, you can see there's some strength in it. It's coming back on itself, so that's a good sign. But you see the clumps there that are still looks like little dry spots. That's pretty much what it should look like at this point. Remember, this got 65% hydration, so it is kind of wet. So You can keep working it in the bowl if you don't have a counter space, but if you have a counter space, you can just throw it out here. And one thing you can do is you can kind of roll it out like this, and then you can, that's kind of like stretching it. You can fold it, and again roll it out again like this. This is doesn't take that much power to do that kind of thing. You just roll it and stretch it and fold it. But you can also use the traditional kneading style, which is taking bits of it, folding it, and using the heel of your hand to push it in. You can do this one-handed. You can do this two-handed, depending on how much effort you want to put into it. But the key isn't time, like how many times you do it or how long you knead the dough for. You're basically kneading the dough with the goal in mind to get it to a smoothness to where when you push in, that it doesn't just sit like that. It should pop out immediately, right? So you're just working towards that. So you can do it with some speed, and don't worry about overstretching it during this stage. During this stage is again, you're just building the structure. And so you'll break some of the structure as you go, which is fine because the structure you're building is necessitating air pockets. So you're trying to when you fold it over, you inevitably are going to leave some air in there. You can start to see some of the structure here. If you look closely, you can see kind of like a spider webby kind of thing happening here. That's what you're building on, right? So I'm opening out that structure right now so you can see what it should look like. And so you're just continuing to build on that, right? And each time you knead, you're adding to that structure. So even though this dough has a lot of water, it's not really sticking to my hands, and the reason being is because we've allowed the moisture to even out all throughout the dough, and because of the structure and the gluten structure is starting to adhere and to kind of connect all the moisture and the gluten to kind of these fibers that you see here, right? And so it wants to stick to itself. It doesn't want to stick to you now. So that's the whole point. So you can just do this for a little while, build a little structure. Okay. So I'm not going for anything smooth at this point. Remember, all I wanted to do was just get everything incorporated and even out all that moisture. So that was the whole point. Okay, so now we've got kind of a rough piece of dough here. You can see the texture there. It's not smooth yet, but that's okay. We're going to just leave that to rest another 8 minutes. Okay, so it's had another rest. As you can see, it's still kind of patchy looking, but that's exactly what it should look like at this point. So take it out. There's a little bit of residue there. Doesn't really matter. And you can see this. You can kind of still see some of the structure that was there. And at this point, we're gonna try to smooth it out, right? So if your dough isn't getting nice and smooth, one of the reasons is most likely the lack of resting periods you're giving it. So you can see after giving it some rest, you can start to see the bit of smoothness there, right? You push it down. Remember when we pushed it before, the hole just stayed there. Now if you push it in, it's starting to bounce back. This is almost done. Almost ready to put away for the evening. Okay, so I'll stop short of, you know, breaking it. So we have a nice smooth dough ball there. And that's pretty much ready to put away for the evening. So this, again, I think, let's see how much we got here. So I'm going to tear that off, and we'll see what we've got here. This is 1,129 grams. So now this is going to make 4 dough balls. So let's see what we can make. So we're going to go ahead and separate that into dough balls right now, because I'm going to give this basically a good 24 hours rest time in dough balls. So let's see what we got. So 1129 divided by 4. I don't know, I'm not good at math. Let's see. Okay, so that's 282 grams each. So we're going to put that in. That's 257. 279, 282, that's 282, what's that? 306, cut that off, let's do 294, 286, what's that? 281, that's close enough. Here. 250, 281, just add a little bit there, 282, and then this leftover one should be, well, that says 286. It's kind of close enough, but maybe I'll just shave off a bit here. Okay, we got 4 equal pieces of dough here. So normally, if I have a big event, I'm going to put these in a big dough tray, but no, this is just for a family dinner, just my family, so I'm just going to roll these up and put them into some bowls. Okay, 4 equal sized dough balls, and I will put these into some bowls overnight. And that's let's see, right now it is noon Friday, and I'll probably get to cook these probably about 5 p.m. tomorrow, Saturday. So they'll be there for 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29 hours. I guess that would be 29 hours. And that's pretty much it. Dealing with very wet, or dealing with, or actually trying to avoid dealing with sticky dough, and being able to hydrate it well. So that's it for this video. Stay tuned for the next video when we cook these guys.